Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's class. We're doing this class as a way to energetically activate a set of vibrations. That's the best word I can use to describe the effect that this week's exercise in this class is going to hopefully have on your energy body, on your subtle energy body. And in this way, when we study how to prime the energy body to receive intuitive information before we actually go into the work of the intuitive readings, which we'll be doing in close succession to this energy activation focused class here, what we do is we really empower ourselves to bring forward the best intuitive readings that we can. We're pretty much fine-tuned in a very similar way to perhaps the knob on a radio can be tuned to receive a signal from a certain station, a certain channel of information comes in that way. We tune our energy bodies to receive information that carries some of the vibrations and energies that many people are experiencing within the same frame of time as you. So in other words, today's activation session is going to be best if you use it between about Tuesday, February 28th and whatever this Sunday is. I think it's March 2nd or 3rd or 4th or something like that. So this week basically, and early into next week, there's a period of about 10 days or so that this week's energy activation that I'm about to teach you here is going to be absolutely perfect to fine-tune your subtle energy body to receive very powerful intuitive information on the energy waves or the channel of the vibration of this week. So you're going to get all of that in today's session. Before we go any further, I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction to me for those of you who don't know me very well. Some of you have been on my email lists for years and years and years, and I've been very active in the intuitive and healing arts and yoga and tarot on various forms of social media, especially Facebook, for about 8 or 9 years now. I've actually been reading tarot cards for amazing, very powerful people for probably close to 20 years now, when I really stopped to think about it. Actually, I think it's just a little bit over 20 years that I've been doing intuitive readings for people. I grew up in the United Kingdom, and most of my time in the United Kingdom, just funnily enough, was spent around the energy centers that a lot of the crop circles and major stone circle formations of southwest England surround. So that was the area that I grew up in. I was just down the road from a huge stone circle complex called Avebury, and crop circles were just sort of something that happened every summer where I came from, and nobody really had a good explanation for that. But somewhere in my childhood, I started to receive very strong future forecasting in my dreams. And this happened more than once or twice in exceptional enough ways that I started to really pay attention. And before I knew it, I had grown a real fascination with all things to do with predictive fortune telling and the intuitive arts. So this strong fascination stayed with me long enough that it followed me into college and university studies in anthropology, archaeology, history, and the literature of certain cultures' mythologies and folklores. And I put all of this together in a fascinating study that surrounded a core, central, private study that I was doing outside of my university work in the tarot and in another more energetic art known as Kundalini Yoga. And through the tarot and through Kundalini Yoga, I began what would basically end up being a 20-year exploration of intuition and the energy arts, the movement arts of yoga and Tai Chi, and the art and science of meridian work and acupressure and all of the healing modalities that have popped up all over the world that claim to be tapping into and taking advantage of a unique life force energy that humans all over the world have called all sorts of things. They've called it prana, they've called it chi, they've called it life force, they've called it subtle body energy. They've mapped it flowing through meridians and points and mamas and chakras. And so this study fascinated me, and when I really started to explore the ritual and ceremony that cultures all over the world brought with an exploration of other worlds or dream times or astral planes or heaven or whatever they wanted to call a connection with intelligences and sometimes beings that offered them messages seemingly from another plane of existence, another level of existence. While I was studying all of this, the fascinating world of Carl Jung and the psychologists who were really starting to explore his concept of the collective unconscious and archetypes came into my field of vision as well. So I really explored intuitive development from all angles possible, scientific, academic, and actually putting myself out there as an intuitive reader myself, having a very personal relationship with the tarot over decades of study. So this is something that I now bring together for my students, most of whom, funnily enough, I met in events that had more to do with the yoga world than it did the intuitive world that many of us might picture a tarot reader hanging out in today. I never worked at a New Age bookstore. I never did anything like that. I kept with the yoga far more in terms of my own business, but it was the tarot and my intuitive practice that developed right alongside my yoga practice that really steered me in the directions for success in my own businesses and my own career. They didn't always have everything to do with teaching other people how to read the tarot. For years, I used the tarot as a very constant partner to my intuitive practice. And so today, what I do when I teach all of this to students is I really start to break these two practices, an intuitive practice and an energy worker's practice of some description, into components that you can then start to form associations between perhaps what you would term your energy body's experience of perhaps one of the cards that are depicted in the tarot. I'll talk more about the tarot in a minute when we get into the introduction to the tarot part of the class. Right now you should see on the screen there's a sort of a little schedule, an outline of the 3 basic things we're going to cover in this little class for you here. But when we go into that work of developing your intuitive practice, we can draw very heavily on what a lot of people in the West are now a lot more familiar with. We have had an absolute renaissance in terms of the rebirth of yoga in the West between, well, just over the last century, really. Everything that's really happened since the Great War and World War II in Europe and later America, with where we went to developmentally as humanity in the West, it really paved the way for the gurus of India, especially, to recognize that we were on the brink of some amazing resurgences in terms of what humanity was going to be able to do within the next century or so. People who had the foresight to recognize this and care enough about civilization, about Western civilization, decided at that time to bring yoga to the West. They helped to bring many of the sages and the gurus that we saw over the last century or two to establish in the West. People like Krishnamurti and a number of people that the Eisenhower administration has since been seen to have been sponsoring coming to America. Especially down in the sort of Encinitas corner of California. Very interesting story there, the whole development of that whole spiritual yogic scene in the West was actually quite well planned out when you look at what was really going on behind the scenes there. And the history of that fascinates me, as well as what that ended up meaning for humanity, and that fascinates me also as an anthropology student. So all of this, it gets really fascinating when we now look at the new turn of the century, the turn from the 20th century where all of that happened with yoga, and reminding the Western collective consciousness that they had energy bodies. All of that has pretty much happened, and many of us, especially people who tend to find my trainings, have an experience of some form of energy work. Many of the people who end up really taking to my classes happen to be Reiki practitioners and body workers and people like that, and yoga teachers. And so when I first started presenting intuitive development, it was surprising to me at first, but then I thought about it and I thought, well, I suppose that makes sense. The people who seemed to be the most interested in developing their intuition were the people who had already, as a rule, had an experience that awakened their perception of their energy body. And that's probably as it should be. And I think if I was really honest, that was my experience too, as best I can remember it, when I started having really strong intuitive hunches as a child in southwest England. What happened at first was I had visions of energy patterns and grids that would pulse behind my eyelids. There was a definite energetic body experience happening that sort of opened a gateway, shall we say, for me to that intuitive realm. And so with 20 years of study in Kundalini Yoga now, and deeper studies of what exactly I'm looking at when I'm looking at tarot cards and replicating intuitive readings, a big part of that, when I really stop to look at it, is all about the energetic state that you are in, that you allow to happen for you. It's a state of consciousness that allows you to connect in the traditional sense of the Sanskrit word yuj, which means union, and it comes from the same root as the word yoke, and this is where we get the word yoga from. It's all about union with that divine consciousness. And when we can find systems that get people to that union with divine consciousness, not only are they tapping into their intuition, but they are tapping into the channels that are really best aligned for them in terms of intuition. And what I mean by that, I guess, is you could always tap in and receive all sorts of consciousnesses that you could pick up messages from if you tap into your intuition and you don't know how to properly align yourself with that which has your highest good and highest, most what shall I say, best development at mind from that soul level perspective. That's the consciousness that really you need to be tapping into in order to really make your intuitive skills work for you. So that's kind of where I go when I teach people to do intuitive readings. I guess that's a very long way of saying that. And in today's little class, what I'm endeavoring to do here is that everyone who's pretty much watching this video at this point has found a group that I'm running on Facebook where somewhere between 200 and 300 members at the time of recording, which is brilliant. And a couple of times a week, I've been putting out an opportunity in the group for people to write me a one-sentence question that I then go through a process of bringing through some tarot cards, and I give them a one tarot card answer, and then we chat for a little bit about these tarot cards that have come up. So along with your mini reading, you also actually end up with a little bit of a mini introduction to the tarot. So what I'm going to do just a little bit before we get into the energy activation and the connection session that I've got here for you is I'm going to just briefly talk about the tarot so that when you get your card result, if you have put in a reading request this week, or if you're just checking out the video and you're thinking about maybe doing a one-sentence question later on this week or next, now that you found the group, that's fine too. You're going to be able to get a lot out of just the energetics of this class. So that you can better understand those tarot card readings if you want to look at any of them that I publish. Let's just go over for a little while here a little bit of a brief introduction to the tarot, and then I'll also show you the deck that I'm going to be using to bring forward this week's readings, which is called the Victorian Fairy Tarot. And then we'll get on with that energy activation and the astral connection session. And you'll be able to do that session and it will give you very powerful dreams. It will give you a very powerful heightened intuition, even if you didn't put in a reading request this week. Okay, so the tarot has been around for so very long that its roots are actually a little bit foggy, to tell the truth. The tarot is one of those mediums that has been done over so very many times that nobody's really kept track of everything that has ever happened with any tarot deck in the world ever produced. There are just far too many of them at this point. There are thousands and thousands of different tarot decks. Some of them are not in publication anymore. Some of them you can find at your local Barnes & Noble bookstore and on Amazon Prime and everywhere else. But the thing that all tarot decks have in common is that they all have 78 cards. And that's what I'm going to focus just the 5 or so minute introduction that I want to give you to the tarot, just for the purposes basically of having you understand the really deep wisdom system that is behind the choice of the tarot as the intuitive medium for myself and my students, say, versus just an oracle deck by one author. I use the tarot in part because there are thousands of different tarot decks out there to study. It is the richest system, as far as I'm concerned, in the world to do intuitive readings with for that reason. No other oracle deck comes close to having the sheer number of tarot decks that there are out there in the world. Now, that being said, when I teach the tarot to my students in my Tarot for Beginners course, and then I also have a series of advanced tarot and intuition courses that I also teach, when I teach the tarot, very often I will give them a very large primer in one specific deck called the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And the reason that this deck is highlighted so much by tarot teachers is partially because it's over 75 years since it was published. So it was actually published in 1910. originally. So there are some copyright things that have expired. So a lot of the images a lot of people claim have entered the public domain. I'm sure you could find lawyers that argue one way or the other about that. But the other reason that this deck is so prominently featured and frequently featured by tarot teachers is also because its intention, when Arthur Edward Waite created this deck, it was his creation and his way of saying this deck is not the exclusive intellectual property of brotherhoods, and the Golden Dawn Brotherhood comes to mind, and the Rosicrucians and the Masons and all of the other secret societies at that time that were using the tarot and claiming it to be secret knowledge that should be guarded and not shared. Arthur Edward Waite, in many ways, and he did so in some respectful ways and some not so respectful ways, depending on who you talk to, he kind of flew in the face of a lot of that. And when he published his tarot deck, now I said his tarot deck for a reason there, we're going to discuss the illustrator in a minute, but when he published that alongside his book, The Pictorial Key to the Tarot, his intention was to open up this wisdom to everyone. And that is something that I wholeheartedly agree with. The wisdom that is in the tarot is basically a sacred text of images. And if you get involved with creating your own deck or choosing a deck that really resonates with you, you're diving into that sacred experience and making it yours in a way. It brings a real choice-centered approach in when people feel like they've got the freedom to choose a deck that really resonates with them. And because Arthur Edward Waite opened up the tarot in that way in 1910 with his deck here, many people, hundreds if not thousands of deck creators since 1910, used in one way or another the ideas for the images, the scenery a lot of the time, the symbolism for their own tarot, and they sort of jumped off from where the Rider-Waite-Smith deck left off, really. Okay, Smith and Rider and Waite are names I just want to briefly touch on for those of you who are interested in the history of the tarot. Arthur Edward Waite gives the name Waite in there. The Rider was the publisher. Rider was the publishing name. And we've only just added Smith onto the end of there just in the last decade or so to honor and acknowledge the deck's illustrator, who was a woman who died in poverty, like many artists were. These illustrations that we know so well today in this tarot deck are hers and were commissioned by Arthur Edward Waite, and she was the illustrator on there. Now, we don't know how much guidance Smith got on what exactly she was illustrating. Did Arthur Edward Waite tell her exactly what to put on those cards? How much of this image was in his head, and how much was really her own deep spiritual teaching being passed on visually is something that we really don't know. But she's carried such an immense amount of power, really, in the tarot community, and not being very well acknowledged for decades and decades and decades, really, and kind of a century. So on the centenary in 2010, they published a commemorative deck with Pamela Coleman Smith's name on it, which I think was a really nice gesture. So one of the decks that I have really come to love in recent months, really, I really wasn't that familiar with this deck even a year ago, is the deck that I'm going to be reading with today. And I'm going to just put the image on the screen here of the Victorian Fairy Tarot, and maybe we'll scroll through some of the images here from the Victorian Fairy Tarot for you. But really and truly, the Victorian Fairy Tarot is a very different deck in lots of ways to a traditional Rider-Waite-Smith tarot. But the same 78 cards are here. They're just represented and depicted differently by this deck's artists, which are just beautiful illustrations of very Victorian era concepts of fairies, so very attached to energetic beings of light that many people in the British Isles have thousands of years of experience and stories about seeing and having encounters with. So this deck just touches me personally because it's it's harkening back to an era that I was in the middle of in one way or another. Just the era that I grew up in Britain was just steeped in the history of the Victorian era before it. So I love this deck. I think it's a beautiful deck. One of the things I really noticed about it that I liked a lot when I started reading with it a lot in recent months is that the images go all the way to the edge of the deck. There isn't really a border on this deck. So when they're put next to each other, there isn't that division of the scenery by border. It's almost like you can see larger readings with this deck as one vision. It's not like looking through separate windows and pulling the reading apart so much. It's a stunning deck to do one card readings with, which is what we'll be doing today. Some of the things that I'll talk to you a bit more about when we get into readings, for those of you who want to follow along with the readings, are some of the things that are basically in every single deck of tarot cards out there. Every tarot deck is divided into two sets of cards. There are 78 cards altogether. Of those 78 cards, 22 of them are called Major Arcana cards. And the Major Arcana cards are sort of the big soul path journey experiences that in one tradition or another, in one story or another, you will see any hero, any human soul having an experience of these 22 major life experiences. And for this reason, when these cards come up in readings, I very often point out to people that it's a Major Arcana card, which probably means this is a really big deal. This is a sort of a soul quality developing or transforming moment, a big life moment that they're dealing with. Now, if I get a Minor Arcana card, there are 56 minor cards. We call those cards minor cards because those are more minor life experiences. I always use the phrase from the Zen Buddhists, chopping wood, carrying water, when I talk about the Minor Arcana cards. This is the ordinary life stuff. It may or may not be really earth-shattering, transformative stuff. It's just day-to-day stuff. So if someone comes to me for a reading and they have a minor card featured in the reading that I want to point out to them, but maybe they came in and they were very, very worried about something they asked about. Very often, if the result is a Minor Arcana card, I feel very comfortable telling them, you must not have that much to worry about, because otherwise you would have gotten a major card here. So just knowing little things like whether it's a Major Arcana card or a minor card can really shape a lot about what you tell someone right there. Right there, basically, something. You would be able to pick out something with with ease from any tarot deck already. And you could base a reading on perhaps what the image told you, spoke to you, brought up from your unconscious, how the image made you feel, and just knowing whether you were looking at a major card or a minor card, you could actually do quite a good intuitive experience for yourself just with that knowledge right there. So I always encourage people after they take these small mini lessons with me, by the way, to, if they feel curious, to work with tarot in their own practice. go ahead, jump in, and don't worry too much about what level of training you have had in the tarot in order to do that. The decks out there today are very much encouraging, I guess I would say, of you having your own experience. These images are here to prompt your own intuitive responses. I can teach you all sorts of things about why this one card came up and what this one card's number means, what its symbol means, what its name means, how it fits in terms of all of the other experiences in the deck. You know, what an answer to a question might be if one of these cards comes up. I can teach a lot of that because I'll teach you patterns to look for, like whether it's a major card or a minor card. I'll chat a little bit more about the 4 suits when I actually do the readings in a little while. All of these things mean something. The numbers can mean a lot too. But you can feel free with any tarot deck that appeals to you to go shopping for a deck, find one that resonates to you, and start using that deck right away. Because the other thing that happens, that has to happen in order for you to be a really good tarot card reader, along with the right courses, and perhaps a certification or two, you know, later on, is your own experience needs to be a rich one. It needs to be a frequent one. Just like going to a gym to build a muscle or to build a strong core or something. The more you go, the more you repeat your exercises, the stronger what you're building gets. And that's the same with your intuitive practice. It's the same with your yoga practice. It's the same with a meditation practice. The more frequently you do it, the easier it gets to get back into that state of being able to bring really clear intuitive material through. So with that being said, I think that's a good little intro class. I hope you learned something about the tarot. It's certainly a passion of mine. If you stay to the end of this activation session, I'll direct those of you who may be interested in checking out any of my courses to some of the things I've got up on offer this week. But right now, let's jump right in to the energy activation session that I've got here for all of you. And this is a nice one if you would like to integrate elements of this activation session into perhaps your yoga practice or your meditation practice. This is an energy activation and connection session that is going to be really good for you to do, especially for the next week and a half. But this first part of it on this next slide that's coming up on the screen right now is actually an activation session that would be a fairly powerful one to do for the month of Pisces. For the entire month of Pisces, the zodiac month of Pisces. This is an excellent session to do. The month of Pisces and all of the zodiac months of the year, I've connected, and many tarot experts and teachers have connected to different major arcana cards that we see in the moon. Right at the top of this little slide, you might see that I've got 5 different examples from 5 different decks on this slide. It's a bit cut off at the top there. But those are 5 different examples of a tarot card, a major arcana tarot card known as the moon. And this is the card that is most frequently connected by different tarot scholars to the zodiac month of Pisces. And the affirmations that I have on this screen, you're very welcome to take and use if you would like to use them in a yoga practice. Just my request is personal practice only until I've worked with people on a certification level. Then, you know, absolutely we can let you go into groups and run this stuff too. But you're more than welcome to use this and take it into your own personal private practices anytime. These are affirmations that I created to really enhance the energetic effect of the mudra, which I will talk you through, which is the hand gesture that you see on the bottom of this screen. And they're specifically designed to enhance your energetic and intuitive prowess and awareness in the month of Pisces. So the mudra, let me just guide you into this mudra shape here, because it can be quite complicated to try to explain. Basically, what you are doing in the mudra is you are connecting your index finger with the pad of the thumb on the same hand. So now you've got sort of two rings formed by the little circles between the thumb and the index finger of each hand. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to join those fingers up. So just unattach them and interlock them and attach them back up. And then what I want you to do is I want you to connect the other three fingers. Lift them up and connect the pads of the other three fingers there. So with this mudra shape in your hands now, what you're doing when you're connecting your thumb to your index finger, by a lot of body language experts reckoning, is something like connecting your will to your sense of direction. So this month, the month of Pisces, connected so heavily with this tarot archetype, the moon, can pull us into some deeply intuitive places that we're asked to deeply feel our experience this month with our emotion bodies. Now, to get through this and out the other side of it can be quite a scary thing a lot of the time for people, especially if they know that they might have a few unpleasant feelings that they might have to look at. So by connecting the will finger and the direction finger here, while we connect the pinky fingers and the fingers that are representative of things like the intuitive force and the unconscious desires, they're connected tip to tip. But the thumb with the index finger gives us this grounding of we know where we're going, we know how to get through this experience and out to the conclusion that is rightfully ours, that we deserve in our life experience. So in other words, we're not going to get lost here. We are connected and strong enough to have a good, powerful Piscean experience this month. After we do this connection, I'm going to do a few other affirmations if you want to stay with this mudra. And the couple of affirmations that you'll see me scroll through to after this slide have to do with a more specific connection between a specific one of the 78 tarot cards and specific periods of time throughout the calendar year. So this bit here is good for the month. The next slide I turn to will be good for about a week and a half, to cut a long story short as far as just usefulness to you goes. Okay, so if you want to just hold this mudra and sit with a tall straight spine, you might want to close your eyes, tuck your chin so that the crown of the head is almost perfectly balanced as far as that cord of energy that you can run through from the top of your head all the way through the center of your spine down to your sit bone area. This cord of energy in here connecting you to heaven and earth, the human in the middle of all of that, a conduit, a receiver of information from both heaven and earth. Relax here with your eyes closed, and I will speak the affirmations for you to hear. I will speak them twice, so on the second time around you can join in if you want. It is time to experience silence so that I might find a deep well of inspiration. I draw strength from stillness and hope. Second time around. It is time to experience silence so that I might find a deep well of inspiration. I draw strength from stillness and hope. This month, I will focus on how my emotions are doing. My intuition is my best guide. Once more, this month, I will focus on how my emotions are doing. My intuition is my best guide. Now, staying with this mudra shape, breathing deeply, return to your breath as your focus for a few moments and check out how you're doing, seeing if you can sense anything that might have shifted in your energy body or physical sensations. Sometimes, but not always, people have physical sensations that they can sense when they're pulling into these different states of consciousness. Staying with the mudra shape, I'm going to repeat now the affirmations for both the Eight of Cups and the Nine of Cups, which represent the period of time that I'm recording in now and the next week and a half or so of our time here. These are periods of time that are connected with these tarot cards and the experiences that the tarot cards depict, I guess I should say. So staying with the mudras, I won't go too much into the reasons for these depictions here because I do want to make the activation session something you can repeat, and you can come back to this recording and play it again for yourself at any point this week. Breathing deeply, closing your eyes. Here's the affirmation for the Eight of Cups. I'll say it twice through for you. I am at peace with my own true path and am willing to spend the time on my own emotional self when I need to retreat. Once more through. I am at peace with my own true path and am willing to spend the time on my own emotional self when I need to retreat. Here's the affirmation for the Nine of Cups, which is great to connect to for the period of time we're just now moving into between Tuesday and Wednesday. I allow my joy to bubble over into a satisfaction that will always stay in the core of my heart and focus on helping others share this amazing feeling too. That's what the next week and a half is about, everyone. One more time through. I allow my joy to bubble over into a satisfaction that will always stay in the core of my heart and focus on helping others share this amazing feeling too. Return your focus to your breathing, release the mudra, and drop your hands down onto your lap, palms facing up. Long, deep, even, velvety breath. Notice the quality of energy that you might be sensing through your body now. Notice if you feel anything that feels different from how you felt before you started this session. So for those students of mine who take things just a little step further from here, I've got a few other ways for you to go if you're curious enough about this work to explore really what's going on from here, from this point onwards, with those students of mine who are now taking this energy activation as their energetic primer and choosing to explore the world of doing intuitive readings for themselves. And even, people who get intuitive work from me, they get very curious about this work as well. And one of my jobs as an intuitive teacher is to really make it as easy as possible for as many people on the planet right now as possible, as I can possibly help, to really get in touch with their intuition again. Over the last 100 years or so, our society has been so guilty of just saying really mean, derogatory things about people who had intuitive skills, relegating them to, sort of an outcast role in our society that's very often shamed or made fun of. When the truth is, the intuitive mind is every bit as powerful, if not a lot more powerful, in terms of what is really going to guide you into having the inspired life of your dreams manifest. that intuitive mind is actually worth a lot more to most people at the end of the day. The rational mind is brilliant. It's gotten us some wonderful advances in science and social sciences as well over the last century or two. We wouldn't be where we are today without the amazing capabilities of our rational mind. But our intuitive mind needs to get back into our consciousness as a whole, as civilization. So one of the things that I feel really strongly about, I suppose, is opening the field of deep intuitive study that can actually really give you solid answers and guide your life to as many people as possible. And that means where I can, I try to give my students opportunities to get into programs for very, very accessible prices. So this is only going to be available for the first 10 of you to take it up. And, it's one of the best ways that I can really give you to get started with developing your intuition, where you're pretty much going to be able to dive right in to a very deep study. This study that I've got for you today goes well beyond the basics. As you may have already noticed, things that sometimes are the entire content of intuitive development programs, like the energy activation session that I just give my students whenever I can, like I did for you today here. That is just the start of what we can really dive into if you really are serious about developing your own intuition, but also the skills that will really enable you to give amazing intuitive readings to other people as well. So today I've built a package that is on special offer for the first 10 people to take it up. Because a big part of really getting you as deep of a dive into your intuitive development as I can, as quickly as I can give you, is to make sure that each and every one of the students who are coming into this program be the focus of what I call a practice session. Now it says 10 Celtic Cross practice sessions on this slide here. The Celtic Cross is the oldest and most well-known, arguably, tarot card spread in the world today. We have evidence of the Celtic cross spread being used as a tarot card reading, or a card reading at least, in ancient Ireland over 400 years ago. It doesn't have much to do with Christianity. It has to do with the shape of the reading, which is a sacred shape, which does have to do with Christianity, but has to do with some forgotten roots that Christianity really builds on in terms of sacred geometry and things. And we're going to get into all of that in the course. This training is going to take you through learning the tarot very basically, learning all of the parts of the tarot so that you have a really good basic grasp of the tarot itself and what certain cards might mean when they come up. And then it's going to take it to another level here with this Celtic cross spread training, where we do the same spread, the Celtic cross spread, which is a 10 card layout. There's an immense body of information held in any Celtic cross spread because there's 10 cards worth of information, and each position in that reading is a study unto itself, really, along with the cards that could show up in that position. So the best way that I have ever developed for my students to master the Celtic cross spread to a degree of mastery where I will sign off on them as, doing this reading really, really well. That's a major part of my intuition mastery programs, is practice. And so the best thing that I can do as your teacher right now is to get 10 volunteers together, and that's what you have the opportunity to do here, and give each of the 10 volunteers an in-depth 30-minute or so Celtic cross reading based on a much longer letter that you can write me, and I'll receive your letter as the request for this bigger reading. You get to give me a lot more information in the letter. I'll prompt and explain more about that to the 10, but there's a lot more information that you get to give me and ask about in that letter than in your one sentence request here in this group. So you get this 30-minute session session that is just for you, just based on your more in-depth questions, and I analyze and interpret your Celtic Cross practice reading as part of an hour-long class. So I'll analyze and give you some answers, but then I'll be explaining to you why I'm drawing those conclusions. So by the end of the hour, you actually know a lot more about the tarot as well, because you've had the meanings of all of those cards explained to you in a way that if you ever get another tarot card, you'll know what is recurring in that reading, even if you do it for yourself and I don't get involved in that reading later on. So I want to give you that background with this. For my students who are truly into mastering the tarot, you're going to have access to all 10 of these sessions. We're going to protect the 10 participants' anonymity, but if they want to remain anonymous, they can, I suppose I should say. But in addition to that protection, we are going to make these 10-hour-long lessons that include these 30-minute readings available to our mastery students so that they can pretty much learn a lot of intricacies that will only come out with specific examples as far as how I can best teach them. They learn by looking over my shoulders and having me do these readings and then explain why I'm coming to the conclusions that I am during those readings. So it's a very hands-on, involved course. Now, some of you might be asking how it is that I'm basically going to get you guys all through these 10 sessions at an advanced enough level that you'll really understand what's going on in terms of having a degree of mastery going into this program of the tarot itself. So the other thing that I really want to show you right now, here's a slide that kind of lists all of the stuff you get in Advanced Tarot 201, the reading practice sessions I was just talking about. Let's go on again to the next slide. Here we go, where I chat a little bit about the bonus course that you get if you're one of these first 10 sign-ups as well. If you sign up to be one of these 10 participants, you get to write me your letter, your deeper, more long, involved reading request. I will do that 30-minute reading. The focus of one of our hour-long practice sessions in that advanced course will be you and your reading. The whole course will be, around the 10 participants. But the 10 participants, I realized, were going to have so much of a deeper experience if they wanted to do a bit more of an involved study of the tarot. You don't necessarily have to do that advanced study before going into these practice sessions and getting your reading. But if your curiosity is there, I wanted to give you everything you needed. So for the first 10 sign-ups, you're also going to get access to the complete Tarot for Beginners video course. It usually retails for $97 all by itself. It includes an 80-page download for you of the Tarot Healing Affirmation Guidebook. If you looked at the screen I had up while I was doing the affirmations for the 8 of Cups and the 9 of Cups, the images that I had on the screen were excerpted from this 80-page book. I have an affirmation like that for all of the tarot cards, and I want all of my students to have that on hand for the discussion that is the 16 class Tarot for Beginners course. You can go through this course in about the same amount of time as you would an immersion weekend workshop. That's how I originally intended the course. It's about 14 hours in length. It's 16 classes. You have lifetime access to all of those video classes, and you get the book as the download as soon as you join here as well. So you can go through that Tarot for Beginners course over the next week or so as we get people on board here, and then if you become one of our 10 volunteer sign-ups here today, you'll have time to submit that reading request, that letter to me at some point over the next week, and over the next 2 weeks you will have your 30-minute reading and actually all 10 hours of that course. We're doing sort of an intensive study with this group of 10. Hopefully it's pretty obvious now why we do have to limit this program to do 10. It's simply because if I do more than a 10-hour course, it gets really, just a lot for my mastery students to keep up with. So I wanted to give you a course that you didn't feel the pressure to go through all 10 hours of right away, but you do have that 30-minute reading as part of one of those sessions that should be extremely valuable to you. And between that one session and this Tarot for Beginners course, you're going to get a degree of mastery with tarot card reading that it's very tricky to give students if they don't have the focused attention from an expert facilitator like this group of 10 will let me give you. If I really made it much larger, I wouldn't be able to give that that focused session, that whole hour specifically to you, and that's something that I really wanted to give these 10 students the experience of. So that's why I have to keep it to 10. Now, how do you know if there's one of these 10 spots left? Right below this video, you're going to find a Buy Now button. There's a little button that you can click on or push on or tap on, and it says Buy Now. And if you see that button there, that means there's one of these 10 spots still available right now. I'm going to have those buttons taken off this page when we get our 10 this week. So if you see that button there, you know there's a spot available for you right now. You can get on board with the Tarot for Beginners course, the Advanced Tarot 201 course, and the 30-minute to 60-minute reading from me, which is another couple of $100 in value right there. So overall, you've got over $350 worth of classes, courses, and readings included here. And for the first 10 to grab this package, we're going to get all of this to you for just $78. There are 78 cards in the deck of tarot cards, so I thought that would be a great introductory price for the first 10 who are really enthusiastic enough to grab this special offer. Thank you so much for going through the energy activation session and the mini class on tarot here with us today in our group. For those of you who have requested readings this week, I do have those readings coming up next, and we'll get them to you in the next day or so here. For all the rest of you in the group, thank you so much again for joining us in the group readings, and I'll talk to you again soon.